The slave man found the mistress hiding behind the smokehouse, what she begged him not to tell. The morning sun had barely risen over the sprawling plantation when Samuel moved silently among the barns, his bare feet stirring the dust on the worn path. The air was heavy with the smell of hay, horses, and the faint tang of smoke from the night's fire in the cookhouse. He had risen earlier than usual, knowing the day would be long, and already the workers were moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm, their eyes wary under the glare of the overseer, Mr. Carter, who patrolled with his usual sharp gaze. Samuel's mind wasn't on the chores. It was on the strange tension that had thickened in the air over the past few days, the kind of tension that makes even the birds hush their songs. Something had changed. He couldn't name it yet, but it prickled his skin like a warning. He rounded the corner near the smokehouse and froze. A shape crouched low behind the building. The figure was small, trembling slightly, wrapped in a loose shawl despite the heat. Samuel's breath caught. It was Mistress Caroline. Her face was pale, and her hands clutched the shawl as if it could shield her from the world. "Ma'am?" he whispered cautiously, stepping closer but keeping to the shadows. Caroline flinched but did not move. Her eyes were wide, filled with something Samuel had rarely seen in her. Fear. Not the kind of fear a child might have from a fall, but fear that came from knowing someone could hurt you for reasons you could not prevent. "You shouldn't be out here," Samuel said gently, trying to sound calm even as his own pulse quickened. "What happened?" Caroline shook her head. I had. I had nowhere else to go. I couldn't stay in the house." Her voice trembled, barely audible above the distant clatter of workers in the yard. "Please, you mustn't tell anyone." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Tell anyone what, ma'am? What happened?" She glanced around nervously. Even from this distance, the overseer could see, and Samuel knew he'd be in danger if Carter caught them. Caroline's gaze fell back on him, desperation in every line of her face. They're planning something," she whispered. "My husband. He thinks I know things I don't. And if anyone finds out I spoke with you." She swallowed hard. "I can't risk it." "You can't risk it." Samuel felt the cold grip of unease tighten around his chest. There were stories, always stories, about what happened to slaves who were accused of meddling in the affairs of the master's family. Punishments were swift and cruel, and often no explanation was required. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, I don't want trouble. I'll keep quiet. But tell me what's wrong. Maybe there's a way I can help." Caroline bit her lip, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I don't know who to trust," she admitted, voice barely a whisper. "Carter has been asking questions. About people in the house, about servants he thinks are hiding things. I overheard him talking to the master last night. They suspect someone. Someone near the fields. Someone helping. Someone." Her words faltered. Samuel realized she was referring to the runaway boy from a neighboring plantation, an innocent child caught in a web of suspicion and fear. I can help, if you let me," Samuel said carefully. "But we have to be smart. Quiet. No one can know." Caroline nodded rapidly, clutching his sleeve. "Promise me," she begged. "Promise you won't speak of this. Not to anyone. Not the house. Not the fields. Not even Elijah." Samuel felt the weight of her trust pressing on him. He swallowed hard. "I promise, ma'am. I'll keep this to myself." A low whistle of wind stirred the dust at their feet, carrying the distant calls of the overseer and the clatter of wagon wheels. Caroline's hands trembled, and Samuel knew that if she remained in the open, someone would see her, and everything could unravel. "You have to go," Samuel said. "Back to the house. Or inside somewhere safe." I can't," she said, shaking her head. "Not yet. Not until I know what to do. Please. Stay here. Stay with me a little longer." Samuel hesitated. He had never been in this position before, not guarding, not hiding, not being the one someone depended on in fear of authority. But he could see the truth in her eyes, panic and helplessness, mixed with a plea for protection. "All right," he said at last. "But you mustn't make a sound. If Carter or anyone else sees us. His voice trailed off. The unspoken consequence was clear. They stayed behind the smokehouse for several minutes, listening. The plantation seemed unusually quiet, every sound amplified. The wind whispered through the cotton rows, the horses shifted in their stalls, the distant hammering of a blacksmith echoed faintly. No one approached, but the air hummed with a quiet tension. Caroline leaned slightly against the wall, her back pressed to the wooden siding, and finally exhaled. I don't know how much longer I can hide things, she admitted. Every time I try to speak, I feel their eyes on me. I can't. I can't breathe. Samuel offered what little comfort he could. You will be all right, he said, though he himself wasn't certain it was true. I'll make sure no one knows you are out here. You have my word. A faint nod. That was all she could give. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, trying to steady herself. Then, from somewhere beyond the cotton rows, a voice shouted, sharp, familiar, commanding. Caroline, where are you? Both froze. Samuel's heart slammed against his ribs. He recognized the voice of Carter, the overseer, scanning the fields with suspicion. Caroline's eyes widened. Go, she whispered urgently. Hi! Please, don't let him see you. Samuel stepped back into the shadows of the smokehouse, flattening himself against the rough wood. His breath slowed, his ears straining to hear the approaching footsteps. He could feel the tension rolling off her like waves, see the fear in every small movement. The moment stretched. Carter's shadow appeared first, long and menacing, moving toward the smokehouse. He stopped and squinted, scanning. Samuel remained perfectly still. Caroline pressed herself tighter to the wall, silent. After what felt like an eternity, Carter muttered something under his breath and moved on, distracted by a worker heading toward the barn. The danger passed, for now. Samuel exhaled silently, his chest tight. Caroline's hands were still trembling, but she finally managed a small, grateful nod. Thank you, she whispered, voice barely audible. Thank you for staying. Samuel offered a small, reassuring nod. Just be careful, ma'am. And remember, no one can know. Caroline pressed a hand against her chest. I I will. I promise. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of dust and smoke, as Samuel watched her retreat slowly toward the house, still keeping low, still wary of every shadow. He stayed behind the smokehouse until she disappeared from sight, listening to the faint creak of wagon wheels, the distant voices, the rustling cotton leaves. Then, only when he was certain she was safe, did Samuel allow himself to breathe fully. He knew this was only the beginning. Something dangerous had been set in motion, and the mistress, frightened and desperate, had placed her trust in him. The responsibility weighed heavily, but Samuel didn't flinch. He had made a promise, and he would keep it, no matter the cost. The plantation stretched before him, silent, tense, and full of unseen threats. And behind the smokehouse, a secret had been shared, a secret that could change everything if it were ever revealed. The morning that followed was unusually still. The usual clamor of the plantation, the clattering of buckets, the lowing of cows, the hammering from the blacksmith, seemed muted, as if the land itself had held its breath after yesterday's events. Samuel moved among the barns and stables, working silently, but his eyes kept drifting toward the smokehouse, toward the house, toward any shadow that might hold danger. He hadn't slept well the night before. Even after Caroline had returned safely inside, his mind had been restless. Her plea had weighed on him. Please, you mustn't tell anyone. Now, as he tied down a loose board on the barn wall, he sensed something shifting in the air. A faint whisper of movement. Not the wind. Not an animal. Someone was watching. He stiffened. Samuel. It was Caroline's voice, faint and tremulous, carrying from the far end of the yard near the cotton fields. Samuel's heart skipped. He wiped his hands on his trousers and moved toward her cautiously, keeping to the shadows. She was there, alone, crouched behind a row of cotton. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her skirts, her eyes scanning the horizon. Samuel approached slowly. Ma'am, he whispered. "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be in the fields alone." Caroline flinched but didn't rise. I needed to see," she said, voice barely audible. "I needed air. I couldn't stay inside after what happened yesterday. I I don't know who to trust." Samuel knelt beside her. "The overseer is watching. Your husband will be inside soon. You mustn't risk it." She shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. "I can't hide everything forever. I hear things. About servants who are missing, about whispers at the kitchen. I fear what Carter and the master might do if they discover any irregularities. I," her voice cracked, "I don't know what to do." Samuel's mind raced. He had seen fear in the eyes of the enslaved countless times, but this was different. This was a white woman, trembling with terror, vulnerable in ways he hadn't expected. The thought of someone like her being caught in danger made his stomach knot. "We'll find a way," he said, voice low but steady. "We just need to be careful. Quiet. No one can see us together." Caroline nodded, wiping a hand across her face. "Yes. Yes, you're right. But even with your help, I'm not sure I can trust anyone. Not even the other servants. Not even the maids in the house." Samuel glanced around, taking in the fields, the barns, the distant outlines of wagons and horses. The plantation was alive with work, but beneath it all, tension hummed, invisible and electric. A sudden noise made them both freeze. The sound of boots on dirt, deliberate and measured. Samuel's heart thumped in his chest. "It's Carter," he whispered. Caroline's eyes widened. "What should we do?" Samuel scanned the surroundings. The cotton rows were thick, the soil soft from recent rains, the shadows deep enough to provide cover. He reached out, gently but firmly, and guided her behind a taller cluster of cotton stalks. "Stay low. Don't move. Breathe slowly." The overseer's shadow passed close enough to make Samuel's stomach turn. Carter's eyes swept across the yard, sharp and suspicious, lingering over areas where any unusual movement might be noticed. Samuel held his breath, his body tense. Caroline's hands clutched at the stalks for balance, her face pale but resolute. Carter muttered under his breath and moved on, his boots crunching the soil until he disappeared from view. Samuel exhaled slowly, relief mingling with lingering tension. "You have to be more careful," he said quietly. "You can't risk being seen again." "I know," Caroline replied, voice trembling. "But I needed to speak to someone. I feel trapped, helpless." She swallowed, her voice catching. "I'm afraid what they might do next." Samuel nodded. "Fear can make people reckless. We have to think before we act. Always. That's the only way we survive here." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "Samuel, do you think, do you think I'll be safe?" He hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But I do know one thing. I won't let anyone harm you while I can prevent it. That's my promise." For a moment, silence fell between them. The wind rustled the cotton leaves, birds called from the trees, and the plantation moved around them, unaware of the fragile trust and the secret that now bound them together. But danger was never far. Later that afternoon, Samuel was sent to the barn to check on the horses. The air was stifling, the sun relentless. As he moved among the stalls, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him. He glanced over his shoulder repeatedly, and a subtle tension pressed down on him, the kind that warned of trouble before it arrived. And it did arrive. A rider approached along the main road, dust rising behind the horse. Samuel recognized the figure instantly. Mr. Carter, pacing, furious. He had a look in his eyes that made Samuel's stomach twist. He was not here for routine oversight. Something had gone wrong, and Carter was about to make an example of someone. Samuel's thoughts immediately went to Caroline. Had she been seen again? Had anyone suspected her? Or worse, had someone spoken of their encounter yesterday? Carter stopped near the barn, scanning the stalls and fields. Samuel froze, heart hammering, knowing any sudden movement could draw attention. Carter's gaze swept over him like a blade. "Samuel," Carter barked, voice sharp. Where's the mistress? The lady of the house? Samuel's mind raced. He had to answer carefully, without lying, but without revealing her secret. She's inside, sir, he said cautiously. Carter's eyes narrowed. Inside, you say? And alone? Without a servant nearby? Samuel shook his head. No, sir. She has maids attending her. Carter studied him a moment longer, then spat on the ground. Make sure she stays put, he said, finally mounting his horse. And you, he added, glaring, don't wander from your work. As Carter rode away, the tension didn't ease, it thickened. Samuel knew that Carter's suspicion would only grow. Any slip, any rumor, and their fragile secret could shatter. Later, as the sun dipped low, Samuel returned to the cotton fields where Caroline had been. She wasn't there, and the silence of the rows pressed in on him. He felt the weight of responsibility heavier than the cotton bales he carried daily. He understood now. This wasn't just about protecting a mistress from her husband's wrath. It was about navigating a minefield of suspicion, lies, and power. One wrong move could destroy everything. And yet, he would not abandon her. Not while he could make a difference. Because some promises were worth risking everything to keep. The following morning dawned with a heavy, suffocating heat, the kind that pressed against the skin and made the air feel thick and unbreathable. Samuel moved through the barn, his hands busy but his mind racing. He had barely slept, the events of the previous day replaying in his mind like an unending loop. Caroline's fear, Carter's suspicion, and the knowledge of the dangerous secret they now shared weighed on him like stones in his chest. He had made a promise to her, and he intended to keep it. But promises in a place like this were fragile things, easily shattered by rumors, misunderstandings, or the overseer's relentless scrutiny. By mid-morning, Samuel was sent to the smokehouse to retrieve a bundle of supplies. The air around the building was unusually still, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. Then he saw her. Caroline. She was crouched low behind the smokehouse again, her hands pressed to her face, shaking slightly. The sight of her made Samuel's stomach tighten. She had taken no heed of the sun, the workers, or the possibility of being caught. Something had driven her here, despite the danger. Ma'am, he whispered, moving quickly but quietly. What are you doing here? You shouldn't be out in the open like this. Caroline looked up, her eyes wide and fearful. Samuel, I couldn't stay in the house. Something is happening, and I don't know what to do. I overheard Carter speaking to the master last night. They suspect someone. Someone is hiding things. I think they know someone has been speaking to me. Samuel knelt beside her, lowering his voice. We have to stay calm. You can't let them see you like this. Not even a shadow, not even a flicker of movement. If Carter or the master catches you, it could ruin everything. I know, Caroline whispered, her voice trembling. But I'm terrified. I don't know who to trust. I don't know if I can survive if they find out I spoke with you. Samuel took a deep breath, trying to steady both himself and her. You will survive. But we must be careful. Quiet. Every movement, every word. It must be measured. No one can know. They stayed hidden for a moment, the cotton leaves rustling softly in the wind, the distant sounds of the plantation muted by the tension in the air. Then a shout rang out. Caroline, where are you? Carter. Caroline's eyes widened in terror. Samuel hide. Samuel grabbed her arm gently, guiding her behind a thicker cluster of cotton stalks. Stay low. Don't move. Breathe slowly. I'll make sure you're safe. Carter's boots crunched against the dirt as he approached, his gaze sweeping the fields. Samuel held his breath, every muscle tense. Caroline's hands clutched at the cotton, her body trembling. Carter's shadow passed close enough to make Samuel's stomach turn. The overseer muttered something under his breath and moved on, distracted by a worker heading toward the barn. Samuel exhaled slowly, relief mingling with lingering tension. Caroline looked at him, gratitude and fear warring on her face. Thank you, she whispered. Just be careful, Samuel replied. No one can know. For the rest of the day, the tension didn't lift. Every glance from Carter, every word from the master, every shadow in the yard reminded Samuel that they were walking a knife's edge. Caroline remained hidden, returning to the smokehouse only when the overseer had gone, and Samuel stayed close, vigilant, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. By late afternoon, a commotion erupted near the main house. Voices raised in anger, the clatter of objects being knocked over, a scream that made Samuel's heart leap into his throat. He ran toward the sound, moving quickly but carefully, keeping to the shadows. As he approached, he saw Caroline standing near the porch, her face pale, her hands trembling. The master was there, Henry Royce, his face flushed with anger, his fists clenched. Carter was beside him, pointing toward the yard, shouting orders. Samuel froze, realizing with horror that they had been discovered, not by sight, but by suspicion. Henry's gaze swept over the gathered workers, finally landing on Samuel. "You," he barked. "Step forward." Samuel's heart pounded. He had expected this day might come, but he had hoped it would not be so soon. He stepped forward slowly, keeping his eyes lowered, his hands at his sides. Henry's voice was sharp. "I've heard things. Whispers. That someone has been speaking to my wife without permission. Who is it?" Samuel said nothing. He could not betray Caroline. Not now. Not ever. Henry's eyes narrowed. "Do not lie to me." Caroline stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "It was not him," she said. "No one has spoken to me inappropriately. I went to the fields because I needed air. That is all." Henry's jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe this?" "I do," Caroline insisted. "I am telling the truth." The yard was silent, the workers frozen, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Samuel felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. If Caroline's words were not believed, the consequences could be disastrous for both of them. Henry studied her face, searching for signs of deceit. Finally, he exhaled sharply, his anger deflating slightly, replaced by a dangerous exhaustion. "We will see," he muttered, stepping back. Samuel felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The breaking point had come, not through violence, but through revelation. Secrets had been tested, trust had been stretched to its limits, and now the fragile balance of safety hung by a thread. Caroline turned to Samuel, her eyes wide. You were brave," she whispered. I didn't know if you could keep calm." Samuel shook his head. "It's not bravery. It's survival. We all must survive. That's all that matters." The master and the overseer retreated inside, but the tension lingered. Samuel knew that suspicion had not vanished. It had only been postponed. Every glance, every word, every step from now on would be watched. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Samuel and Caroline remained near the smokehouse. They were safe for the moment, but both understood that the breaking point had passed, and the consequences of exposure would soon arrive. The secret they shared had been tested. Their trust had been forged in fear and danger. And now, nothing would ever be the same again. The day after the confrontation dawned uneasy, heavy with a tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the plantation. The air carried a thick humidity that clung to the skin, and even the familiar sounds of labor, the rhythmic scraping of hoes in the soil, lowing of cattle, the clatter of carts, felt oppressive, almost unnatural. Samuel moved among the barns and fields, performing his tasks with meticulous care, but his mind was elsewhere. He could not shake the morning's events from his thoughts. Caroline's presence behind the smokehouse, her whispered plea, the way Henry Royce had scrutinized him and the other workers, it all weighed on him like a stone. In his chest, the danger had not passed. It had only changed shape. Now, every glance, every whisper, every footstep in the yard was a potential threat. By mid-morning, Samuel noticed that the overseer, Carter, was behaving more aggressively than usual. He prowled the yard with an almost predatory focus, stopping workers to ask questions about their movements, scrutinizing their every action. Samuel kept his head down, but he could feel Carter's gaze lingering. The tension between them was like a live wire, ready to snap. Caroline, meanwhile, had not been seen outside the house since the previous day. Samuel knew she remained behind the walls of the mansion, likely under close watch by her maids or servants who were now nervous and fearful themselves. He worried about her constantly. Her trust in him, delicate as it was, had become a dangerous liability. As Samuel worked in the fields, he overheard snippets of conversation among the other slaves. Whispers of suspicion, stories of overseers questioning anyone who had been near the house, murmurs about someone hiding secrets. They were all threads of danger that could unravel everything in an instant. One wrong word, one careless movement, and the fragile shield protecting Caroline and himself could collapse entirely. By late morning, the consequences of the previous day's events became painfully clear. Carter had convened the male slaves in the yard, barking orders and demanding explanations. He asked them about Caroline's movements, about who had been near the smokehouse, about who might have been speaking to her. Samuel remained silent, observing from a distance, knowing that any sound from him could betray them both. The overseer's questioning grew increasingly sharp, his voice rising as he accused and berated the workers. Samuel could see fear radiating from them, the tense postures, the hurried glances, the whispered denials. He understood that even those who had no knowledge of the events of the previous day were now implicated by association. Suspicion was contagious, spreading like wildfire through the ranks of the laborers. Meanwhile, Caroline's position became even more precarious. Though she remained inside the house, Samuel knew that the master would be watching her closely. Henry Royce's anger had not dissipated. It had only taken on a quiet, simmering intensity. A single misstep, a single word, and Caroline could face serious consequences. Samuel's mind churned with worry, imagining every scenario, calculating every risk, trying to anticipate what might happen next. By mid-afternoon, the tension reached a breaking point. Samuel noticed two riders approaching from the main road. The dust they raised stirred unease in the air, and Samuel's pulse quickened. The riders were not familiar. They were men sent by neighboring plantations, their presence signaling that something beyond the immediate boundaries of the estate was stirring. He watched as the riders dismounted, their eyes scanning the yard. Carter approached them, speaking quickly, gesturing toward the barn and fields. Samuel strained to hear, catching fragments of conversation. Talk of missing supplies, of rumors that someone had been seen near the house under suspicious circumstances, of complaints lodged with the master. The consequences were now extending beyond the immediate household. Gossip, suspicion, and fear had begun to ripple outward, threatening to engulf everything. Samuel realized with a sinking heart that even his careful vigilance might not be enough to protect Caroline. The stakes had grown exponentially. As the day wore on, Samuel continued his work in the fields, every movement measured, every action deliberate. The overseer's scrutiny never wavered, and the whispers among the workers grew more insistent. The fear was contagious, a palpable weight pressing down on everyone. Samuel felt it in his chest, in the tightness of his shoulders, in the constant tension of his muscles. By evening, the situation reached a critical moment. Carter approached Samuel directly, his eyes sharp and accusatory. "I've been watching you," he said, voice low but menacing. "You've been near the mistress. Tell me what you know." Samuel met his gaze steadily, careful to keep his expression neutral. "I know nothing, sir," he said quietly. "I've been doing my work, as always." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I've seen the way you move, the way you watch. You're hiding something. And if I find out you're keeping secrets, you'll regret it." Samuel held his ground, his hands clenched at his sides. He understood the risk. Every word he spoke, every motion he made, could tip the balance. But he could not betray Caroline. Not now, not ever. The overseer studied him for a long moment, then spat on the ground and walked away, muttering under his breath. Samuel let out a slow breath, relief tempered by the knowledge that the danger had not passed. It had only shifted, becoming more insidious, more pervasive, more difficult to anticipate. Night fell over the plantation, bringing a fragile quiet. The workers retreated to their quarters, and the fields were empty, save for the sounds of distant animals and the rustling of leaves. Samuel remained near the barn, vigilant, knowing that the safety of the mistress, and perhaps his own life, depended on his continued vigilance. He reflected on the events of the day. The consequences of yesterday's confrontation had rippled outward, creating new challenges, new dangers, new responsibilities. Trust had been tested, and the boundaries of secrecy had been stretched to their limits. Samuel understood that the coming days would require even greater care, even more careful navigation of the treacherous terrain of suspicion and fear. And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, he felt a sense of resolve. The mistress had placed her trust in him, and he would honor that trust. The consequences of exposure were severe, but the promise he had made was stronger than any threat, any punishment, any risk. He stayed in the barn long into the night, listening to the sounds of the plantation, reflecting on the day, planning, calculating, preparing. The tension had reached a new peak, and the consequences of the previous day's events were only beginning to unfold. Samuel understood now that this was more than a simple secret, more than a simple act of discretion. It was a test of courage, of loyalty, of resilience, and he was determined to meet it, no matter the cost. Because on a plantation like this, the consequences of failure were never abstract. They were immediate, severe, and often irreversible. And Samuel, now more than ever, understood that every action, every decision, every moment of silence or speech carried weight beyond measure. The night deepened, stars hidden behind thick clouds. Samuel leaned against the barn, eyes scanning the fields, ears attuned to every sound. The consequence of yesterday's events would not vanish, and he knew that the coming days would bring even greater challenges. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, he felt a quiet determination. He would protect the mistress. He would honor her trust. He would navigate the treacherous path that lay ahead, one careful step at a time. The consequence of the breaking point had arrived, and Samuel was ready to face it. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when Samuel rose from the small corner of the barn where he had slept. The night had been restless, filled with half-formed fears and imagined whispers. Every creak of the wooden beams above him had felt like a threat, every rustle in the hay a possible betrayal. Yet the moment of truth was coming, and he could feel it in his bones. The plantation was quiet, the workers slow to begin their tasks. A thin fog clung to the cotton rows, softening the shapes of trees and fences, making the familiar land feel foreign, dangerous. Samuel moved deliberately, keeping to the edges of the yard, his senses sharp, alert. Today, he had no choice but to act. He found Caroline near the edge of the fields, her presence barely noticeable in the low fog. Her hands were folded tightly before her, her expression tense. The previous days had left her pale, her hair loosely pinned, strands falling across her forehead, damp from sweat and worry. Samuel approached silently, keeping his voice low. "Ma'am," he whispered, "the overseer has been moving differently today. I can feel it. Something is coming." Caroline's eyes met his, wide and fearful. "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "I overheard Carter last night. He was speaking to the master about the servants again, about secrets being hidden, about someone betraying the household." Samuel's heart tightened. He had feared this day might arrive, but hearing it confirmed made the danger tangible. "We have to act carefully," he said, "but we may have to make a choice. A moment will come when inaction could be more dangerous than movement." Caroline swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edges of her shawl. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "I'm not brave like you, Samuel. I've been hiding, trying to survive. But if they find out what I know, or what I think I know, I don't know what will happen." Samuel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You have been brave every time you stepped away from the safety of the house," he said. "Every day you've lived through this fear, you've shown more courage than most. But today, We must be careful. One wrong move, and the consequences could destroy more than just us." A sudden shout from the yard startled them both. Carter's voice rang sharp and commanding, the sound cutting through the fog. "Samuel!" He froze, knowing the overseer had noticed his absence. Caroline flinched beside him. "Go!" Samuel said urgently. "Hide near the cotton. I'll handle this." He stepped into the open, head lowered, hands visible, and moved with deliberate slowness toward the main yard. Carter was waiting, his expression a mix of suspicion and barely restrained anger. "You've been hiding," Carter said, his voice low but menacing. "I've been watching, Samuel. I've seen you move differently. Speak. Watch. Tell me, what are you hiding?" Samuel's mind raced. The moment of truth had arrived. He could speak or remain silent and hope the overseer had no proof. His gaze flicked to the misty cotton rows, where Caroline remained hidden, watching with wide, fearful eyes. He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice steady. "I'm hiding nothing, sir," he said. "I do my work. I follow orders. That is all." Carter's gaze lingered, sharp and piercing. "Do not lie to me," he said. "You know better than anyone the consequences of dishonesty." Samuel held the stare, unflinching. The moment was tense, each second stretching into eternity. Behind Carter, the yard was silent, every worker frozen, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. Samuel knew that a single misstep could ignite suspicion, could unravel the fragile trust that had been built. From the edge of the fields, a sound, soft, deliberate, shifted the tension further. A horse snorted, and the distant creak of wagon wheels added another layer to the suspense. Samuel felt the moment pressing against him like a tide, threatening to sweep him into exposure. Then Caroline moved. A single, quiet step forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Carter," she called softly, "please. Listen. Samuel has done nothing wrong. He has only been careful, responsible, honest." Carter's eyes narrowed. "And you trust him?" "I do," Caroline said firmly. "He has been honest, always. And I know he would never betray me or the house. You must believe me." The overseer's jaw tightened. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled, a long, slow release of tension, and muttered something under his breath. "We'll see," he said finally, voice low but carrying the weight of warning. "I will be watching. Everyone will be watched." The moment passed. The yard resumed its labor, the tension lingering like smoke. Samuel retreated to the shadows near the cotton, heart still racing. Caroline followed, keeping low, her hand brushing against his arm briefly, a fleeting reminder of the trust they shared. The afternoon brought more challenges. Samuel noticed that small items in the barn and fields were being checked, scrutinized, cataloged. Carter's suspicion had not vanished. It had only shifted to a quiet, calculated vigilance. Every worker was under watch, every movement noted. Samuel realized that survival would now demand constant attention, every step measured, every word weighed. By late afternoon, a small crisis arose. One of the younger slaves had dropped a bundle of tools near the main house, the clatter echoing through the yard. Carter's voice rang out immediately, sharp and accusing. "Who was that?" he barked. Samuel froze. The young boy's eyes darted toward him, seeking protection, guidance. Samuel stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "It was an accident, sir." The boy did not intend to make noise. "We were moving supplies for the barn." Carter's gaze lingered on Samuel, studying his face, looking for signs of deceit. After a tense moment, he barked another order, sending the boy to fetch more tools, then turned and walked away. Samuel exhaled slowly. The moment of truth had passed, but he knew that the day would not be over until dusk, and even then, suspicion would linger. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deep reds and purples, Samuel returned to the smokehouse. Caroline was there, waiting, her face pale but determined. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light and the weight of the day. "You were brave today," she said softly. I don't know how you manage to stay calm. It's not bravery, Samuel replied. It's necessity. The moment of truth comes for everyone eventually. Today, we survived it. Caroline nodded, pressing her hand to her chest. I am grateful, she whispered, for your courage, for your discretion, for everything. Samuel shook his head. We both have a role to play, he said, and the day is not over. The overseer is still watching, the master is still questioning, and the consequences, they are still out there, waiting. They stood in silence for a moment, the fog settling around them, softening the edges of the world. The plantation, though seemingly calm, carried the weight of suspicion, the echoes of yesterday, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. Samuel knew that more challenges were coming. He understood now that courage was not a single act but a series of decisions, small and large, each carrying risk and consequence. Today, they had acted wisely, carefully, and with integrity, but the danger was far from over. As darkness fell, Samuel and Caroline returned to their respective places. She to the house, he to the barn. Both carried the unspoken understanding that the moment of truth had tested them, revealed their character, and strengthened the fragile bond of trust. But trust alone would not be enough. They would need strategy, patience, and constant vigilance. The true test of courage, Samuel realized, was not in surviving one moment, but in enduring the relentless, quiet pressure of suspicion, fear, and danger day after day until the balance could shift in their favor. And as he lay in the small, shadowed corner of the barn that night, listening to the distant calls of the animals and the faint murmur of wind through the cotton rows, Samuel understood a hard truth. The moment of truth was only the beginning. The coming days would demand more, and survival depended on the strength of the choices they made now. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, and vowed silently, no matter the cost, he would protect the mistress, keep her secret, and navigate the dangerous path ahead. The moment of truth had tested him, and he had not faltered. Tomorrow, the consequences would come knocking, and Samuel would be ready. The morning arrived with a chill that had not been there before, the first hint of winter creeping into the fields, and the air carrying a dampness that made the cotton leaves droop. Samuel rose early, as always, his mind heavy with the events of the past days. The tension that had gripped the plantation seemed to have shifted slightly, not dissipated, but transformed into a quiet weariness that hung over every worker, every shadow, every building. He moved through the barn with careful steps, his hands steady despite the lingering anxiety in his chest. Today felt different. The overseer, Carter, had been quieter in the early hours, speaking sharply but not shouting, his scrutiny constant but less immediate. Samuel sensed a subtle shift in the currents of suspicion and power, an unspoken acknowledgement that the events of the past week had changed things irreversibly. By mid-morning, Samuel found Caroline at the edge of the cotton fields, the sunlight catching the strands of hair that had escaped her pins, the pale skin of her face flushed from anxiety and the chill in the air. She looked at him, eyes wide but calmer than before, though the weight of fear and exhaustion still lingered in the lines of her face. Samuel, she whispered as he approached, it feels different today. The tension, it's not gone, but it's lighter somehow. Do you feel it? Samuel nodded slowly. I do. Carter's still watching, but I think he's uncertain now. He doesn't know what to make of the past days. And the master, he has questions, but he has not acted. That hesitation works in our favor. Caroline's hands trembled slightly as she held them together. I was so afraid, she admitted. Every day I feared what might happen if someone discovered, or if you faltered. But you've been steadfast. I can hardly believe it. Samuel shook his head. I did not act alone, ma'am. Your caution, your trust in me. It has been a partnership, and that is what has kept us safe. For now, the air was crisp, and a quiet stillness settled over the fields. For the first time in days, Samuel allowed himself a moment to take stock, not only of the immediate danger, but of the larger picture. The mistress's secret had remained safe, the rumors and suspicion carefully managed, and the immediate threat had passed. But he knew that on a plantation like this, danger was never fully absent. It lingered, always, like smoke in the corners of a room. Later that day, Samuel was summoned to the house under the pretext of delivering supplies. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed Caroline waiting in the parlor, seated near the window. The sunlight fell gently across her face, softening the lines of fear and exhaustion. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mix of gratitude and quiet apprehension. "Samuel," she said softly, "thank you. Truly, I cannot say how much this has meant. To me, to all of us who have lived in fear these past days." He lowered his eyes, a faint blush creeping into his cheeks. "It is my duty, ma'am, and I would not have it any other way." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy but comforting. The shared experience of fear, danger, and mutual trust had forged a bond that was neither romantic nor improper, but profound in its own right. It was a bond rooted in courage, loyalty, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the risks each had taken. Caroline reached out, placing a hand briefly on his arm. "I don't know how we will go on from here," she said quietly. "The past days have changed everything, and yet I feel lighter. Somehow, we have survived this, together." Samuel nodded. "Survival is not just the absence of harm, ma'am. It is the ability to continue despite it. And that is what we have done." The afternoon passed in a quiet rhythm. Samuel attended to his duties in the fields. Caroline watched from the porch or the edge of the cotton rows, and the overseer moved among the workers with a watchful eye. The tension remained, but it was tempered now by the knowledge that their careful navigation of danger had succeeded. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Samuel found himself back near the smokehouse. The shadows were long, stretching across the fields like silent sentinels. He paused, looking at the familiar structure that had become the site of secrets, fear, and courage. It was here, behind these weathered walls, that the moment of truth had first arrived. It was here that he had learned what trust truly meant, and what it meant to act with integrity in the face of danger. Caroline approached quietly, her steps careful in the soft dirt. She stood beside him, her gaze following his to the smokehouse. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy but comforting, a shared understanding of what had passed and what lay ahead. "You've done more than I could have imagined," she said finally. I, I am grateful, Samuel, for your bravery, your discretion, your humanity." He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I did what anyone would have done. We all face moments when action is required, when courage is necessary. Today we acted. And that is enough." Caroline's eyes softened, the tension in her face easing slightly. "Yes, today it is enough, but the plantation, the world, it remains dangerous. We must remain vigilant." Samuel nodded. "We will, always. But tonight, we rest, and tomorrow, we continue, one careful step at a time." As the evening deepened, the shadows lengthened, and the cool air settled over the cotton fields, Samuel and Caroline walked slowly back toward the house. The weight of the past day still lingered, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they had faced the storm and survived. The promise of protection, the trust they shared, and the quiet understanding between them had carried them through. Inside the house, Caroline returned to her duties, her movements measured, her expression calm but alert. Samuel returned to the barn, checking the stalls, tending to the animals, his every action precise and deliberate. The plantation moved around them, unaware of the fragile threads of courage and trust that had held the balance these past days. That night, as Samuel lay in the quiet corner of the barn, listening to the distant sounds of the plantation settling into darkness, he reflected on all that had passed. The fear, the danger, the moment of truth, and the careful navigation of consequences, they had all shaped him, tested him, and defined the days ahead. He knew the world outside the plantation would remain harsh and unjust, that suspicion and danger could arise again at any moment. But he also knew that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the ability to act in spite of it. And he had acted. For Caroline, for himself, and for the fragile trust they had built, he had acted with integrity, discretion, and courage. And that, he realized, was the truest measure of survival. The night deepened, stars hidden behind a thin veil of clouds. Samuel's eyes closed, and though sleep came fitfully, it carried with it a quiet satisfaction. The moment of truth had passed, and he had not faltered. The consequences had been faced, the danger navigated, and the trust honored. As dawn approached, the plantation would awaken again, the work would resume, and the world would continue its relentless march. But Samuel knew this. Whatever trials awaited, whatever threats emerged, he would face them with the same resolve, the same courage, and the same quiet determination that had carried him through the past days. And somewhere beyond the smokehouse, beyond the cotton rows, the mistress, Caroline, would continue her life, her secret safe, her trust in him unbroken. In the end, survival had not been about hiding or fleeing. It had been about courage, discretion, and the unwavering commitment to protect what mattered most, even when the cost was uncertain, even when the danger was ever present. And as Samuel drifted into sleep, he understood, with a clarity he had never known before, that this was the true resolution, the knowledge that even in a world of danger, suspicion, and uncertainty, trust, courage, and integrity could endure, and that sometimes enduring was the most heroic act of all.